Everyone. How we doing? Trying to hear the room. I don't hear too well. How's the connection?
It's good here. Are you able to hear people around the room? Should we get the mic?
I think.
Let me get the mic.
Thank you so much. Well, great to see everybody. Thank you for aiding my virtual attendance today from LA. I'm here at my sister's and spending some time with the kids, my nephews. I wanted to start. I hope everybody's gotten a chance to grab a plate of lunch. Thank you to Lisa and any volunteers in the kitchen for what I assume must be a delicious meal, as always. Just checking in on how's the connection? Everybody can hear okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Josh, is this good? Can you hear
Great.
well? All right, so
Yes.
who wants the mic? If you can't hear people, we're gonna have the mic here to pass around, which will help Rabbi Jacobs, because sometimes with everyone talking, it can be harder on Zoom to hear. You know what I think?
Great. So the opening question for everyone is that we're approaching Shavuot, and there are a number of themes associated with Shavuot. Obviously, it's the season of receiving Torah, but the rabbis really identify one core motif of Shavuot, which is what? Most evident in the book of Ruth. It appears as a theme throughout the book of Ruth.
We've got an answer coming.
Okay, thanks.
Take a shot in the dark, but my guess is either studying or dairy.
Yeah.
I love both of those answers. Wait, who was that? Because there's far away, I couldn't see.
Introduce yourself. Us, too. We don't know.
Hello, my name is Anna.
Anna, are you new to the class?
That's not the same. What?
Yeah.
Are you new to the Midrash? Wow, welcome. So nice to have you.
Oh, my last name is Sweet.
I'll
Yes.
share, Anna Sweet and your family has been joining us for Tikkun Leil Shavuot for many years, but it's great to see you from the west side. Are you coming from Mentor? Mentor, okay. Good.
Fantastic. So glad to have you. Yes, so studying and dairy, there's a number of reasons why we do both. Studying, obviously, because we receive Torah, and then dairy because Chalav corresponds in Gematria to 613 commandments. There are a lot of different reasons for that. There are also the agricultural connections, which I just talked about recently, the barley harvest. And so we're in tune with the rhythms of nature and the agricultural piece of it. So cheesecake and study are cornerstones of Shavuot, of course. But when you read the book of Ruth, there's one theme that really permeates, which is chesed. And chesed is loving kindness, right? There's not really one word that captures it in English, so we have to combine two, loving and kindness. And the book of Ruth is about chesed for a number of reasons. A brief refresher, I know we're all familiar with this story, but there is a famine in the land of Israel. And so Ruth, Naomi goes down with her family, her husband and her two sons, to Beit Lechem, which literally means the house of bread, to weather the famine. But in the process, she loses all of the men in her life. Naomi loses all the men in her life, her husband and her two sons. Ruth, did you unmute to say something?
Yes, they go to Moab, not to Beit Lechem.
That's right. They go to Moab. But why did I say Beit Lechem? Because there's...
Because they on the way back, maybe.
Good stuff.
I use GPS on there.
Well, there's right. So that's on the way back. There's bread and Beit Lechem, and which literally means that,
They left Beit Lechem.
right, when there was famine, and they return when the famine ends. Thank you for the clarification. I'm a little distracted over here. I had to attend to something, so thank you for the clarification. Um, so they go down to Moab, and there they meet. Hold on, the dog is coming back. All right, all good. So they go down to. Oh, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. They go down to Moab, where they meet, where the sons, before they die, marry two Moabite women, um, Ruth and Orpah. But then when the sons die, Naomi is left with her two daughters-in-law. The famine ends. They're going to return to Beit Lechem or Bethlehem, right? And she tells her two daughters-in-law, turn back, right? Don't, I have nothing left to give you. If I were to conceive and have a child today, would you wait around until they're grown to marry them? I have nothing left to offer you. Orpah eventually gives in and returns to her people back in Moab, back to her native land. But we know that Ruth clings to Naomi and gives this beautiful speech. Do not entreat me to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. If anything but death separate me from you. So we have this glorious love story between this daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, and this act of kindness. And in our sources that we'll study today, we'll see what else is chesed about that interaction and that commitment. This is also sort of seen as the first or shining example of conversion to the Jewish people. So I actually had prepared two studies today. One is about chesed and one is about conversion. So maybe we'll jump around to both a little bit. But then when Ruth arrives in the land of Israel, she is a total outsider, and she's totally vulnerable and in need of the kindness of others. Some people afford her that kindness, others don't. There is one man, Ploni Almoni, who refuses to marry her and to protect her, and he's never given a name, which I know I've talked about before, but it's such an interesting point that somebody who was not wanting to marry Ruth because she was an outsider, because she was vulnerable and really he saw her as a liability to his estate, and to his name, right? He rejects her, but Boaz, who is the next closest of kin and sort of has the right of the Redeemer, he does marry her. And as a result, we know that King David comes from that marriage, and King David is the greatest name in Judaism. That line is the coveted line, the line of Judah, in terms of the kingship, in terms of Mashiach, where the Messiah eventually comes, is from the line of David. So it's just an interesting irony that Ploni Almoni, who did not want to marry her because he was worried about the liability to his name and his estate, goes nameless in our tradition. Ploni Almoni is John Smith, right? It's basically an anonymous name. Whereas Boaz, who does this act of chesed, of kindness, of telling Ruth, come and glean with in my field, and I'll tell the men not to harass you. And ultimately, he marries her to protect her as a vulnerable person in this time and place, a widow. Not only that, she is a Moabite, and we know that the Torah forbids a Moabite from entering into the Jewish people, which is why the conversion piece of this is so interesting. The Torah forbids certain peoples. It's a very limited list, but of peoples, and they're not currently around today. So the prohibition doesn't exist today because we don't know who is a Moabite, who is, from Amalek, who, Achiti and Amori, these groups that it no longer applies. But back then, certainly, we know that Ruth was, and yet they marry. I know I've mentioned this before in our discussion about the book of Ruth, but the rabbis justify it by saying that the prohibition is only against marrying Moabite men. And since Ruth is a Moabitess, the prohibition doesn't apply. Okay, that's how that's the loophole around it. But the whole book of Ruth is sort of this interesting complement, or really a bar plukta. It's sort of it is a counter argument to the prohibition of exclusivity that is meant to sort of protect the Jewish people from intermarriage and intermingling with, in this case, idolatrous nations or violent nations that would be sort of a bad influence to the Jewish people and potentially lead us away from God. But then the book of Ruth comes to say, but don't be so punctilious about your exclusion, because here comes Ruth, who is a Moabite, but converts and is actually the one responsible for giving us the greatest name and line in Judaism. So that's just a bit of context on what we're talking about when we talk about the book of Ruth, some examples of the chesed that appears throughout. But I want to ask you,
Thank you.
go ahead, comments in the room?
I'm good. I got it.
No,
No comment from
you're just chewing loudly.
I want to ask the room, because this is the direction we're headed when we talk about loving kindness. Do you have an example from your own life of somebody who has been sort of an angel to you in a time when you needed it? An angel, somebody who showed you loving kindness, whether in a big or small way, that came at a time you really needed it. Any volunteers who want to share?
I'm not gonna give any names. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's Lynn, yeah.
Usually you can hear me.
No names, but when a parent died, I had incredible support. This happened, I wasn't here, and I had support from here. And when I was in Florida, when I learned of my mother's death, I was sitting at the swimming pool, and I had people who just came to me, and it was great. And that's where I'm at, so.
That's a really wonderful example, right? Sometimes it's really just presence, just being there, especially in the loss of a family member during Shiva. Angels in the form of people who come up to just show up and be with you. This is a central theme in Rabbi Sharon Bras's book, The Amen Effect, which I've brought before for a class, but I brought a passage I haven't yet shown to you for today's discussion, and it's exactly along those lines about the angels who show up in time of grief just to be there, and the power that has. Nelson, go ahead.
This is kind of a long story. When I moved to Florida, I moved down during the solar eclipse of 2017, and we stopped along the way to view the eclipse. The night before we were moving to our staging area, we were in the Smoky Mountains and in a little cabin, and we went across the road to get something to eat. And I met a woman. She was there with her husband, and we were talking. And I mentioned to her that I had purchased proper glasses to view the eclipse from Amazon, and that but Amazon had told me that they couldn't guarantee the glasses and I shouldn't use them. She went back to her campsite with her food, and I went across the road to see Betsy with our food. And about a half hour later, there was a knock on the door. It was the woman. She'd gone back to her campsite and discovered that I think her dog was sick, and she had to go home, and she wouldn't be using her glasses. And she brought us her glasses so we could view the eclipse. And it was just gratuitous. I don't remember her name. I don't know if I even knew her name ever. We were just strangers, and she was just so kind to us.
Wow. That's beautiful. So you got to see it, and you wouldn't have been able to if not for her, and she went out of her way to make sure you had the right ones. That's really lovely. Beautiful. One more example before the text.
We were in, at the talk about,
Hold on, getting her the mic.
Thanks.
and I will mention names, we were to talk about, with a sisterhood group. We were on a bus trip, okay? And I went to the bathroom, but before I went to the phone to check on my mother-in-law who was in the hospital. And somebody gets on the phone and announces, and I cannot, this is 2001, but he doesn't ask who I am. And he just tells me, oh, she's dying now and she'll be dead in 5 minutes. Oh, well, we had seen her and she was in bad shape. So I run out and I try to find my husband, because how are we going to get back from Chautauqua to Cleveland without a car.
Mm.
And my husband met Ron Moskowitz from Moskowitz Sanctuary. And he said, I have a Jeep, my son's coming up tomorrow, take my Jeep, which my husband had never driven. And we got home, made arrangements for a funeral on the cell phone in the car.
Mm.
And that's how we got home. And we were very thankful to Ron for that.
Wow.
It
That's
was just the way we would have had to get a limo, and it was just like an impossible situation because we had to have the funeral the next day. Because my daughter, one of my daughters was going off to Florida with the kids. It was just,
Wow. So a couple of things. So in there, getting you where you needed to go, right? People who help you in when you're lost, and in that way, maybe in multiple ways, physically lost, but also lost in, again, going back to grief and that kind of loss, right? And getting you there in time to be able um to be there for the funeral. If I heard you correctly. So those are great examples, and it's interesting that sort of loss and death and grief are times where angels show up in forms as well, and in a time when you need them most. So that example will again recur. So great segue. We are going to share the source sheet now. Are you seeing Shavuot and the convert?
Yeah. Orders to live by.
yes.
Were, but not anymore.
Okay, is this one Shavuot a Chesed holiday?
Yes.
Yes.
Where'd it say
Yes, under Midrash.
Line, the second line.
Perfect. Okay, great. Who would like to read our first source? Should I make it bigger? Can you see it? I can make it bigger. Let me do that. 150. Does anybody want to read our first source from Ruth 1:8?
There's the microphone. Yes, you would be very,
But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, turn back, each of you to her mother's house.
Slow down.
Hey, it's a teenager, that's what they do.
It's not speed reading.
May the Lord kindly deal with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me.
Good, beautiful. So this is what we talked about. Naomi telling her two daughters-in-law, turn back. I have nothing left to offer you, right? And there's a Kriya Kativ situation going on, which means it's written one way, but our Masoretic tradition tells us to, when we chant it, chant a word a different way. So what's written is actually Ya'aseh, which is in the feminine, but what we're told to read is Ya'as, which is referring to God, saying, may the Lord, Ya'as is do, right? Deal or do kindly with you, right? And kindly, there's chesed. So really it's loving kindness. So that's where chesed is an example where chesed appears, right? So Ruth is telling her daughters-in-law, look, you have dealt kindly with both the dead and with me. Who are the dead in this case? Her husband and her two sons, right? Their husbands. You have shown kindness to the dead, and you have shown kindness to me, and so may God do with you. Basically, go in peace. May God show kindness to you the way you have both to me and to my children. By the way, the rabbis say that what is the greatest act of chesed?
the dead.
Burying the dead. And why?
They can't return the mitzvah.
Because it's the one mitzvah that can't be reciprocated. You could argue, it's the whole question of, is there such thing as a selfless good deed? The rabbis are saying that burial is an example of a selfless good deed, in that you can't expect any reciprocity from the person you're burying. Of course, you could then counter that, as the rabbis do, with saying, well, it still could be seen as selfish, because when our time inevitably comes, we want somebody to bury us. And so, but it's like a pay it forward kind of a thing. But regardless, it is considered the highest form of chesed, because it can't be reciprocated directly by the person that you bury. So Ruth Rabbah, this is the Midrash on the book of Ruth. Does somebody want to read that second one here? Ruth Rabbah 2:14.
It's such a wonderful job.
I'll just do it.
You got the microphone.
May the Lord perform, may the Lord
Ya'ah.
perform kindness with you. Rabbi Hayana Bar Ada said, "It is written with Ya'aseh, as you performed with the dead, that you tended to their shrouds, and with me, that you relinquished your marriage contracts." Rabbi Zahari said, "The scroll of Ruth does not contain the laws of purity or impurity, and not prohibitions or allowances. Why was it written? Is it to teach you the extent of the good reward for those who perform kindness?"
Great, wonderful. Thank you. So there we just had the Ya'as versus Ya'aseh distinction, even though it's written Ya'aseh, which is referring to the women. Read it as Ya'as, as God showing kindness to you, to the women for what they did for the men and for Ruth, the dead and the living. So it breaks it down, this midrash, and says, okay, as you performed with the dead, this is Ruth talking to her daughters-in-law, that you tended to their shrouds, their burial shrouds, right? Traditionally in Judaism, you're buried in a kittel or plain white shrouds, right? And with me, that you relinquished your ketubot, meaning what a ketubah does is it guarantees certain material possessions for the brides that are due them from their husbands. But here the Midrash is saying that the daughters did not collect from Ruth once their husbands died. So you've basically you've relinquished your ketubot, that you're showing a kindness to me in that way, that you're not collecting, right? So Rabbi Zera said the Megillat Ruth, the book of Ruth, does not contain the laws of purity or impurity and not prohibitions or allowances, right? We just finished the book of Vayikra, of Leviticus, and which all of that is about purity and impurity, prohibitions and allowances, right? That is a book, according to the rabbis who love halakha, who love law, that is a book of great value, right, for what it instructs us. But why was the book of Ruth written? What great value does the book of Ruth add that it should be considered part of Torah, part of our sacred canon? And the Midrash answers, it is to teach you the extent of the good reward for those who perform chesed, right? The gomle chasadim, gimilut chasadim, right? Acts of loving kindness. So what is the Midrash and Ruth Rabbah coming to say about the value of different kinds of laws that we find in Torah weighed up against Chesed, a book that's all about loving kindness?
It's the indirect reward that you get. In other words, yeah, the dead may not be able to reward you, but their relatives or other people see that you did something good, and they will reward the person who did the good deed.
Okay, so that's a good point about what it's saying about the good reward for those who perform kindness. Yes, it's coming to teach us that there's a good reward for those who perform kindness. But let me push back a little bit, which is that I don't think ultimately it's about a tit for tat kind of thing, that it's sort of like karma or you do something good and it'll come back to you, right? We know the world is much more complicated than that. We know that good people suffer, and that it doesn't always feel like your reward, no good deed goes unpunished, right? Sort of pushes back against this sentiment. But maybe the book of Ruth comes to, and actually let me say that in Ruth, there's sort of a sad ending in a way, because Ruth in many ways is a surrogate for Naomi. That is how committed she is to Naomi, because when she finally has a child with Boaz, that child is really treated as and considered to be Naomi's child, right? Naomi, who lost her children, sort of gets another child through Ruth's surrogacy in a way. So there is a way to read the book of Ruth as sort of a surrogacy story, not just a story of the first, or this major example of a convert, but also as sort of this surrogate relationship. But that doesn't seem like the reward that Ruth deserves, right? So it's not. I wouldn't say that it's really just a book about if you do good things, good things will come back to you. I actually think it's more about doing good for its own sake, even if you don't expect, and not expecting a reward for it. But that reward ultimately will come, and in this case, I think Ruth's reward is that she creates this greatest line of the house of, the house of David. So she sort of gets her, but in her lifetime, it's not like a happily ever after she got this child. It's more of a continual sacrifice that she's making. Nelson, you had your hand.
I was going to emphasize that the idea that the real reward was to be the mother, the surrogate mother of the kingship line and the Mashiach line, but also Boaz gets this reward because he makes sure that his men do not harass Ruth. And if you've ever read Of Human Bondage, Somerset Maugham's book about people who go harvesting, there's a lot of sexual favors demanded.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of sexual activity in amongst the plants. And Naomi is very vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And he makes sure that his men leave her alone.
Right. Yeah.
But I have a question related to that. She lays down at his feet. What does that symbolize?
Yeah. I think there's a number of things. One is there is this sort of sexual innuendo. There you could look at it as also like sort of like subservient master, right? You learn at the foot of the master. But I think there's also this chalitza overlay. Chalitza being that, or yibum really. Yibum is the law from Torah that if you if a couple is married, but the husband dies and the woman is childless, so the husband dies before they had any kids, then it actually falls on the brother, the late husband's brother, to conceive a child with the widow in order to keep the name of the dead brother alive in this world, right? So for us moderns, that's a really icky
Yeah.
proposition, right? And actually, even in the Torah, there is a law to get out of it, right? If it's not forced, right? If the woman doesn't want to, or sorry, if the brother-in-law does not want to fulfill his levirate duty, then there is this ceremony called chalitza where you loosen the shoe of the brother-in-law, and it's sort of a public humiliation that the widow, the sister-in-law spits. Right. So
Rabbi,
yeah.
The laws are impersonal. They're just stated facts when the results are what they are. This is more about relationships and behavior, but the relationship between people and how they interact without right or wrong or anything. It's all about the relationships.
Beautiful, right? So maybe there's almost something missing if our Torah is only about sort of laws, reward and punishment, what to do, what not to do, how to behave morally and what's immoral, right? But that the book of Ruth adds something, or maybe fills a gap a little bit, which is to say that don't forget that chesed is among our greatest calls to action, right? That needs to be included in our canon, a story that is simply about the power of chesed, because that is one of our highest ideals as a Jewish people. That is what we strive to, and that's what should guide our days. So I think that is what Ruth Rabbah is saying here, is to say you might think that we're not getting anything that gives us laws on purity or impurity or mitzvot, prohibitions, allowances. And of course, as Jews, mitzvah is central, right? What are we to do, right? It's not about what we think. It's not about just love, although Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, is literally the midpoint of Torah. So you could say it's the beating heart, it's the core. And Rabbi Shai Held wrote a book recently called Judaism is About Love. So you can certainly make the claim. But I think if you're like looking to distinguish, say, Judaism from Christianity, Christians really say that, no, it's all about love, right? Although, as people historically who have suffered from the oppression of Christians, right? We might say, okay, I don't want your love. Thank you, but no, thank you, right? But or how could love demand violence? But regardless, Judaism, by differentiation, is more about mitzvot at its core. How are we to behave, right? But
What happened if
but
the
the
woman
point
does
here.
not want to?
Wait, let me just finish this one point. But the point here being that, however, it's not just about mitzvot. It is also about relationships. It's about chesed, right? It's about treating each other with loving kindness. Um, okay, because
But
the mitzvot were satisfied, right? Everyone had acted according to the mitzvot here, but Ruth is going a step forward, is going a step further, right? Orpah didn't violate any mitzvot. She listened to her mother. She honored her mother. She was going to, but ultimately she did everything by the book correctly from a mitzvah criteria. But it's Ruth who goes that step forward into chesed further. Hold on, there's a couple. I think it was somebody else had a comment. And Ruth, the thumbs up. Are you raising your hand to say something, or did you just agree with?
Yes, yes. We have the ceremony of Chalitza. Probably Ploni Almoni is the one who does the Chalitza.
Right. Exactly. Right. But so the question about why is she laying at his foot? I'm just conjecturing, obviously he's not the one who does chalitza, but I'm thinking it's sort of, maybe there's a tie that like, as opposed to Ploni
Oh,
Almoni.
I guess Ploni Almoni was the first person
He
who
was.
was supposed to do the tekes, the ceremony of Chalitza. He said no, so Boaz was next.
Exactly. They actually came to Boaz first, but Boaz said, you have a closer kinsman than I. So he really has the right of redemption first. It's his to,
Right. Yeah.
right. And then Ploni Almoni says no. And then at that point, Boaz, so Boaz does, he's classy, right? He does, he does everything right. He defers to the closer of kin, who then didn't, rejects. There was one more comment, then let's move on to the next text.
group. But in the Lisa, the woman doesn't want to marry who she's supposed to. Is it permitted?
I think, is that Sheila asking, what about it? Where's the woman's agency in Yibum? I also believe that the woman has a right of refusal, though I'd have to look that up and give you, a more researched answer. But I believe that, I mean, it's hard because actually the hardest, I'll go one further, the hardest piece for me is that in the case of sexual assault, there's actually a law in Torah the that the person who perpetuated the act of sexual violence has to then marry his victim as a way of saying that you have, sorry to use sort of archaic language here, but in the mentality of the time, sullied a virgin of Israel. And so she would now it would be much more difficult for her to get married, and in a society where the men are guarantors for the women and provide that financial security and shelter and all that, then to not marry her would really be to just abandon her to a life of real hardship. But again, on modern ears, we say, well, what could be worse than to continue to deprive the woman of agency and to actually demand that she has to marry the person who did the worst possible thing to her. So I don't want to just freely say I think that the woman has a right of refusal of Yibum, but I'm pretty sure she does. And obviously that's not a law that we observe today. And you know, that just like other laws in the Torah that don't actually translate to how we behave today, because the rabbis um, interpret the laws and apply them to today. And sometimes that means limiting certain laws out of existence. Obviously, that is one that we no longer follow. Okay, let's move on. I know that was a heavy point to make, but it's a good question. Okay, this is from a work called Megillat Ruth, From Chaos to Kingship by Rabbi Chaim Yachter, I think it is. Does anybody want to read his piece here, commenting on what we've just been talking about?
Eventually, Boaz led by Ruth to correct his ways and support her and Naomi. Ruth Rabbah 2:14 famously teaches that Chesed is the core theme of Megillat Ruth. Boaz, the people of Beit Lechem, and all generations of Jews learned not only to meet the material needs of the poor, but their emotional needs as well.
Right. So this is going back to the point that Chesed is really the core theme of Megillat Ruth. When he's saying by Boaz is led by Ruth to correct his ways and support her and Naomi, it's because like our Ruth just mentioned, Boaz refuses at first, saying that there's someone closer of kin. Boaz, the people of Beit Lechem and all generations of Jews learn not only to meet the material needs of the poor, right? That's where Boaz, originally he thinks he's satisfying his sort of commitment to Chesed by telling his workers not to harass her, by saying, come glean at my fields. I'm taking care of your material needs. But what Rabbi Chaim here is saying is that, but Ruth, the book of Ruth goes further to say, it's not enough just to provide for the material needs of the poor, but their emotional needs as well, right? He ultimately loves Ruth, right? Ruth doesn't just need food, she needs love and companionship. And ultimately Boaz comes to that realization, right? It's not enough just to give. So I want to give an example of this, and I'll open it up for any reactions. But Rabbi Alex worked at a Jewish service corps called Avodah, and she was working with the homeless population in Chicago. And one of the events that she was tasked with planning was a talent show. Have I told you this before?
No.
It was a talent show for these people who are hungry and starving and living on the streets. And I said, I don't understand what it in the triage of in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what is this Avodah Jewish Service Corps doing putting on a talent show for people who are hungry? And she said, well, we of course we have programs to feed and clothe, and we do all that stuff, but that's not the extent of a human being, right? They have other needs as well. They need to show you their magic tricks, right? Right? It's like that you forget that a hungry person is a human being with a personality and with other facets of their life. It in a way, it's a form of objectification to sort of put them, or dehumanization, to put them in a box. Oh, they're a homeless person, right? The only things they care about are food and like survival or whatever, or numbing the pain of a homeless existence, right? But to see the full person means not just providing for their material needs, but also actually it goes back to what I think Bob said, because I only heard your voice, I didn't see your face, that it's about relationship, right? And relationship is about truly seeing somebody, and that means letting them tell you that this is your card, right? So I was always really moved by that this talent show for the people she was serving. And that chesed is not just tzedakah, right? Chesed, this in a way differentiates chesed from tzedakah, right? If you just, it's great to, obviously tzedakah is one of our highest values, but maybe chesed is one step further because tzedakah doesn't necessarily necessitate relationship, right? If you put a penny in the pushka, that's wonderful, but you don't actually interact with the person that you're helping. There's no human connection. But in chesed, there is. Okay, I want to move on to a piece of Talmud from Sota. Who would like to read it? It's sort of going back to chesed. Remember when I said Ruth might come because maybe the Torah doesn't have enough chesed in it. It's about mitzvot and purity and impurity. Well, the Talmud will counter that and say, actually, no, the Torah itself is not just about mitzvot and prohibitions. It's absolutely about chesed. Nelson, did you want to read or you have a comment?
Well, I'll read too, but I wanted to ask a question. How does this relate to Maimonides' hierarchy of charity? Where you don't even know the person you're giving to.
Great.
They don't know you.
Well, so there are actually a lot of stories in the Talmud about how different rabbis gave charity because, so obviously the highest form for Maimonides is anonymous giving, because again, it's that like selfless good deed thing. I'm not in it for the credit, right? But there were different rabbis who would do things differently, where some who would like really make sure that they saw the person that they gave money to, but others that would purposefully not. There's an example of rabbis who would go to the town square and sort of just place the money there for the people who needed it, but turn his back and not see who took it. Why would he do that?
I suppose maybe to protect their dignity.
To protect their dignity, right? Paradoxically, it's actually protecting their dignity because, first of all, I don't want to look on and, like this might be embarrassing for you to accept money from me. And so I don't want to. But the other is, I don't want you to feel the pressure to pay me back, right? So there's also this sort of like anonymous giving so that I don't know to whom I am indebted, right? So it makes sure it removes the possibility of indebtedness, because if I don't know who gave it to me, I don't know who to give it back to. But the Talmud wrestles with whether that's the right way to do it, because it's not entering into, so okay, great question. Who wants to read from Sota?
I'll try. Anyway, Rabbi Samley taught with regard to the Torah, its beginning is an act of kindness, and its end is an act of kindness. Its beginning is an act of kindness, as it is written, and the Lord God made for Adam and his wife garments of skin and clothed them. And its end is an act of kindness, as is written, and he was buried. That's Moses. No.
Yep.
And he was buried in the land of Moab.
Yeah, brings us back to Moab and the Ruth connection. But yes, because he didn't get to enter the land. It is talking about the death of Moses, right? He got to see the promised land, but he didn't get to cross over and actually enter it. The rabbis say that the way Moses died was with a kiss. God kissed Moses because God earlier told Moses, when Moses says, "Let me see your face," God says, "You can't see my face and live," right? No one can see my face and live. And yet at the very end of Torah, it seems that maybe Moses gets his wish, according to the rabbis, that he does get to see God's face because God kisses him and he dies. And he's buried, right? But there was no one there to bury him because we don't know where his burial place is. God buried Moses. So it ends with this chesed shel emet, the greatest act of loving kindness, which we already discussed, which is burial. God doing that. But in the beginning, we have God creating coverings for Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, when they realize that they're naked. So clothing the naked, right? Going back to that story of Rabbi Alex and homelessness and the hierarchy of needs. And then in the end, burial. So the Torah begins and ends with chesed. So sort of a counter to Rabbi Chaim Yachter, who is saying, maybe Ruth is coming because there's a sort of a deficiency of chesed that's in terms of emphasis in our Torah. But the Talmud says No. It begins and it ends with chesed, and the very midpoint we've already discussed is ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. So it's throughout, beginning, middle, end. A quote from Rabbi Milton Steinberg, who wrote as a driven leaf, "When I was young, I admired clever people. Now that I am older, I admire kind people." Does this resonate with people? Because I think, and this gets to something I also really see in the book of Ruth, and I didn't want to make it the sole emphasis because I had already taught that here in this midrash class before. But what should we aspire to? Is it to cleverness? Is it to trying to be particularly skilled in a certain job? Is it making the most money we can make? Is it having the biggest societal impact through, our professional, or is it kindness? Is it the ways in which we have an opportunity every day to be kind to people and show up, give them our eclipse glasses, or give them a ride so they can make a funeral on time? What as Jews should be the aim of our lives? And I often don't have, I'm caught in between, because I think there's always the ego. There's always the, how can I be better? How can I get my name out there, right? We talked about what's in a name, right? What makes a name? Ploni Almoni, who cared about his estate and didn't want the liability of, so he forgoes chesed for the sake of his name, which ironically is erased from history. We don't have it. Whereas Boaz, who opts for loving kindness, even at the expense of his own estate, actually gets the best house in Israel, the house of David, right? So, but it's hard. When you're young, you're hungry. I think that's what Rabbi Milton Steinberg is saying. When you're young, you're sort of hungry to advance, and you're hungry. But when you're older, you realize what truly matters, and you look back at your life, and is it, I should have made more, or I should have, my company should have been, or whatever is your sort of professional aspiration should have been even more impactful, or what, or is it, the relationships at the end of the day that is always what comes to mind on your deathbed, right? Or as not even deathbed, but just with the wisdom of aging, you come to realize what really matters. I'll say this real quickly, and then I want to open it up to reactions. This was a filmmaking workshop that I was in once, where they said the mistake you make is that the audience doesn't care so much when you're rooting for a character. Obviously you want them to succeed. It's really fun to watch somebody who's really good at a particular skill, and that's always entertaining. But ultimately, people want the relationship, and that's really what they're watching for. So Rocky, one of the great, films, it doesn't end with beating Apollo Creed, right? The overwhelming favorite to win the match, right? The heavyweight champion. It doesn't end with beating him. It ends with going the distance, which is just not being knocked out. And then it doesn't even end there. It ends with Rocky getting to the microphone and saying, "Yo, Adrian, I did it," right? It ends with, "Yo, Adrian, I did it," right? It's about the relationship in the end. So again, I sort of see that in what Rabbi Milton Steinberg is saying, that when I was young, I admired clever people, skilled people, talented, whatever, now that I'm older, I realize it's about relationship. I admire kind people. Any thoughts in the room? Any agreement, examples from your own life, or disagree?
I have a question. I always blame Ploni Almoni for being, for refusing to marry her. He knew that there was Boaz. This is like the story of Esau and Jacob. We say Esau is the bad one, but maybe Ploni Almoni was really thinking about her. She's going to marry someone who has no other children, who has money. And of course, nobody consults bride, the woman, maybe it was really chesed that he was doing by not marrying her and giving her a chance to have her own family.
I like it. Why I see. So Sheila, through her loving kindness, is coming to Boaz's aid and saying, "Hey, let's not be so harsh on Ploni Almoni." And yeah, I don't think he's vilified. I don't think he's definitively a villain. Same with Esau, right? It's sort of how you interpret. Um, but um, but honestly, I'll take you one step further, which is Orpah too. Orpah, like Esau, kind of gets vilified by the rabbis who say that. So you know who comes from Ruth? We've talked about it over and over. King David. Who do you think comes from Orpah, according to the rabbis?
Oh, what do you Haman?
What did you say?
No, it's not Haman, because Haman was in that.
Haman was suggested.
Oh, not Haman, not Haman, but think more contemporary, just like Orpah's is contemporary of Ruth, who's a contemporary of David, but villain. Goliath.
Yeah.
They say that Goliath, the rabbis say that Goliath comes from Orpah. So there is this sort of like, oh, she went back to her people and her people are idolaters. And, so she then, through her comes Goliath. And there's some interesting scriptural and midrashic proof texts that link it, which I didn't bring, but if you're curious, I can show you. But to take Orpah's, I have a colleague who once gave a sermon about sort of the wisdom of Orpah, that sometimes you have to know when to turn back, right? And you have to know when to sort of put a boundary on, right? Ruth becomes the ultimate loyal surrogate, ultimately, to the point where her child isn't even really her own. Whereas Orpah sort of recognized that she needed to, at first she honored her mother-in-law and was willing to go, but then there is a time perhaps to turn back. So Sheila, I like your approach. Okay, I wanna move on to one final point before we wrap up today. And as I promised, this is where the Rabbi Brous, The Amen Effect, kicks in. It's a wonderful book. Highly recommend if you're interested. But she reads this Mishnah Midot, and we did a session on the Amen Effect before, so this might be familiar to you. But her book really stems from this core text from Mishnah Midot, and it talks about when we make the pilgrimage to the temple, and of course, Shavuot is one of our three pilgrimage holidays where we make that trek to the Holy Temple. And you would think that it would all be feasting and celebration. We've come all this way. It's this joyous. It's amazing, right? We don't really have, I mean, it's the coat for us. But you think of, recently with the new pope. I mean, how many millions, of people show up for that pilgrim? It's just right. Same with Mecca. These great, it's just. But this was ours, right? This one was ours, and. So I'm going to read Mishnah Midot. All who entered the Temple Mount entered by the right and went around, right, to the right, and went out by the left, save for one to whom something had happened, who entered and went round to the left. So think about it like this. Everybody comes in and they're meant to go to the right. And again, it's all festive and wonderful. And you'd think the whole occasion would just be festive and wonderful. But the Mishnah here, in recreating what the temple experience must have been like, notes that there was actually a custom, a law, a tradition that those for whom something had happened would enter to the left and go around to the left, which is basically a way of just having them stick out like a sore thumb, right? In a moment where everyone is gathered, we have to identify those among us who are mourning, or those who are broken in some way, those who have had something has happened to them and they're in need of community, right? So they would go around the other way, and then this would happen, right? So he was asked, this person going to the left, why do you go around to the left? If he answered, because I am a mourner, they said to him, may God who dwells in this house comfort you. If this person going to the left answered, because I am excommunicated, right? If that's what happened to them, they were excommunicated. Then the community would say, may God who dwells in this house inspire you to inspire them to draw you near again, them being the community. Like basically, may whatever caused you to be excommunicated, like may you be inspired to rejoin the fold, right? And that's the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi would say to him, you make it seem as if they treated him unjustly. Rather, they should say, may God who dwells in this house inspire you to listen to the words of your colleagues so that they may draw you near again. Again, sort of going back to the excommunication thing, if it's somebody who did something unjust or wrong to merit that excommunication, then we should comfort them by saying, may God inspire you to listen to your colleagues and come back, right? To listen to the rabbis and be inspired to return. Nelson, and then I only have 3 minutes, so I do want to wrap up with something, but go ahead.
I was going to say that the person may have been excommunicated, but they went to the temple anyway. So they wanted to be
beautiful
back in the fold.
Yes, right. That's wonderful, right? Okay, so but what's interesting is if you look at the Hebrew about what you're supposed to ask of them or what you're supposed to say to them, it is ma lecha, right? What happened to you? Malacha, what happened to you? And you may recognize that phrasing from, and this goes, we were talking about angels earlier. If you go to Genesis 21:17, this is where Hagar has been cast out by Abraham and Sarah. Hagar is Abraham's handmaid. When Sarah could not conceive, Sarah gave him Hagar to conceive and have a child, right? Again, sort of this like surrogacy idea. But then when Sarah and Abraham miraculously have Isaac in their old age, there's an episode where Sarah sees Ishmael, who is Hagar's child, sporting with, it's not clear what that means, but probably some kind of bullying or making fun of or whatever with Isaac. And she's jealous on her son Isaac's behalf and tells Abraham, kick her out. Abraham ultimately does. And sends them out with a skin of water into the wilderness, and they drink through that skin of water, and it seems they are close to death. Hagar puts the boy a bow shot away because she doesn't want to look on the death of her own child. And the angel hears the cry of Ishmael and appears and says to Hagar, Ma lach. What troubles you? What's going on? It's the same thing from Mishnah Midot, what we're supposed to say. What troubles you? Malach, fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Ba'asher Husham, right? And what's interesting, and I'll ask the room, what is an angel in Hebrew? A malach, right? This is one of Rabbi Brash's great points in her book, The Amenaphect. To be an angel, to be a malach, is to ask malach, right? What is it that God ultimately wants of us? I think that's a false choice. I think it's mitzvot and chesed. I don't think it's about choosing one or the other, but certainly mitzvot without chesed is devoid of the moral qualities I think God truly wants of us, right? How many of us know people who are punctilious with mitzvot, but they're just not nice people, right? Or there's like there can be a holier than thou mentality, or there's a, you say hi or good Shabbos on the street and they don't acknowledge you, or, there are more extreme cases of people there, who are very good about, Shacharit, Mincha, Mari, very good about following to the letter of the law, but in interpersonal relationships, they don't treat people correctly. They don't treat people well, right? So that's why the balance is so important, that it's not one or the other, but it can't just be mitzvot devoid of chesed, right? To be an angel, right? We all, and this is where she I want to bring in a text from her piece, and we'll end with this. I'll let anyone who wants to stay beyond 1 o'clock to respond. But she writes, actually, Francis, are you in the room?
No.
Okay, Francis usually reads the text at the end. Does anybody want to read this text from the Amen Effect?
I'll read it.
Go for it. Thanks.
So,
Angels, each one fueled by a unique purpose, appear in moments of great vulnerability to give us moral strength, clarity, and hope. They help us believe again. They awaken us to our responsibility to one another. They challenge us to think creatively about what might be possible. They let us know that we're not alone. They offer protection, connection, inspiration. Rabbi Shalom Noach Berezovsky, known as the Shloimeh Rebbe, suggests that it's not just angels who are imbued with a sacred mission, but each of us too. Our life's work is to hone the spiritual and moral clarity we need to live into our purpose, a purpose unique to each of us and to the time we live in.
I think that Shavuot, I think that the book of Ruth reminds us that each of us has the capacity to be an angel to one another in a time of need. And it can be ways in big and small. It can be as small as asking someone malach, what's going on with you? I'm here, I want to know. I noticed that you're walking in another direction. Um, there are a few examples of angels throughout the Torah, right? When Joseph is looking for his brothers, there is a nameless individual who he comes across who points him in the right direction. And if he didn't do that, everything that was set in motion for the Exodus and our redemption wouldn't have happened, right? If that nameless individual like Ploni Almoni, but in this case, sort of seen as an angel that you're not supposed to ask their name, or their name changes after they complete their unique mission. This nameless individual points this person in the right direction. That's sort of, again, going back to the clever people versus kind people. I've learned that it's even just that moment, that gesture of pointing somebody in the right direction when they needed it, when they were lost, that has the power to actually change the course of the entire world, right? To usher us closer to redemption, to what's represented by the union of Boaz and Ruth, King David, the Mashiach, who ushers in our redemption. So I want to empower everyone as we approach Shavuot to look for ways, both big and small, even small, to bring more chesed into a world that needs it now more than ever, and to not downplay the impact that chesed has on the life of another person. So with that, Chag Shavuot Sameach, an early Shabbat Shalom. And if anybody wants to stay a little for more comments, I am happy to stick around for a little longer.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Not comfortable with your conflating angel, which we think of as a spiritual element, with human. I understand there are times that they take human form in life, but when people show up in times of grief, when people do kind acts in an everyday sense, I'm much happier thinking that that's a person who is doing that they are performing, that they are elevating humankind in a certain way, rather than something outside of us has to enter us in a way to make us do the right thing. And so using that term, it bothers me. I don't know what your thoughts are on how you're using it.
No, I love that. I actually think it can be both and there. I think that we don't have to take the credit away from a human being and say that, oh, that must have been an angel in a human form, because then that deprives credit where credit is due to a human being. And then it removes the possibility that we can rise to that level. Oh, it must have been an angel, because people aren't capable of doing that kind of. So I totally hear your critique there, but I don't think it literally means that that's like in the Torah, where it seems like they are actual angels. Like the rabbis say that was the angel Gabriel, who was pointing Joseph in the right direction. And you might sit there and say, well, couldn't it have just been a good person? Like, why does every good thing have to be an angel, right? Like, but I think in this case, the reason they're saying it's Gabriel the angel is because there was something sort of momentous about pointing Joseph in the right direction that put all of the sort of dominoes that need to be in effect, in place for everything to go the way it was meant to happen. I think that's what it's saying. But no, I think in real life, people, and I think what Rabbi Braus is saying at the end there is that people have the capacity to be an angel for somebody else, not literally it's an angel, not a human, but that people can serve as angels to one another when we show up and ask malach. So it is what you said about rising as a human to the level of an angel, but not an angel who's actually doing it, and not human beings.
I have a question. Why did Ruth give the baby to Naomi?
So Naomi comes back from this experience, and they say Naomi is back, and they say, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because God embittered my life. I'm bitterness. And so I think what Ruth was really trying to do was be a comfort to her and say that, I love you, and I am going to cling to you, and I'm going to show you that your life doesn't have to be bitterness. So I think it was this, like, and I'm not saying that we should all aspire to that degree of selflessness, but and it's not like Ruth was then out of the picture, right? But I think it was her gift to Naomi, who really is. It's a love story. I think Ruth is a love story between Ruth and her mother-in-law.
I like that explanation better than your first one. Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point that she brings up. It's one thing for her mother-in-law to have. The inference when you read the story is that the Bible is that Naomi took over. And that Ruth really didn't want the kid.
Oh, yeah. No. Yeah. I don't think that's the case, because then there's no real sacrifice there if she didn't want the kid, right? I think she loves the kid and wants the kid, but that she sees her role as really being this, like, surrogate. Naomi.
Naomi taking care of the baby. And
Sorry, I can't really hear you, Sheila.
Doesn't have the mic. Get the mic
Oh.
back.
That's your question. Never mind. Go ahead.
Mine's so far off somewhere else.
Mhm.
All right, I have one that's totally somewhere else.
Okay.
In the Talmud, wait, which one was it? It's Baba, one of them. It's
Bill says Baba Ganoush.
No, that was Bill.
Baba
It's
Batra?
Baba Batra 9a, to be specific, well, without getting into the verse. It's talking about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, and et cetera, and that you need, it seems to be totally without the chesed in Baba Batra, because you have to examine whether they really need it and how little you should give them or how much you should give them. You got anything to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting because remember, the Talmud has debates and different opinions, and because there are other places in the Talmud where, actually not the Talmud necessarily, but the Shulchan Aruch, our code of law, that says that you're not supposed to investigate when somebody claims to need food.
In this case, the rabbis were arguing back and forth whether you investigate for the hungry or investigate for the clothing.
Right, right. I know exactly what you're talking about, and the idea also being like which one is more urgent, so you give it because it's more urgent, even if they're lying about it. But if it's less urgent, then you do want to investigate. Again, you want to give responsibly, and I think for all of us, we don't just want to give indiscriminately. Like it's we want to know, where the money's going. We want to know where it's, we want to see that there's an impact, because there is so much need out there that we want to give wisely, right? We don't want to waste our limited funds on what would be a scam, what might be, right? So that's crucially important, and the rabbis acknowledge that. But it shouldn't be such a barrier that we then don't give at all, right? So it's important to be discerning, and it's important to do the research, but not to the point where we would allow somebody who was legitimately in need to not receive from us, so that they.
Where is Maimonides in all this? There's no chronology, right, in Torah. So where's Maimonides with anonymous to anonymous? I mean, this is obviously, exactly who's giving and exactly who's getting.
Right. Well, anonymous giving doesn't necessarily mean that it's both ways, right? It's Maimonides is saying that the giver is anonymous, but what you're giving to, you
The
could,
highest level was anonymous to anonymous.
No, the highest was you get him a job, so he can earn his own money.
I don't know how to fish either.
yeah. Right. But I think what's coming from there then is not about like foolish giving. It's about giving to whoever needs and not wanting the credit. Like that would be the highest form. But I don't think it means be indiscriminate or irresponsible with giving. That's certainly not a requirement to reach the highest level of giving, is to put yourself in a position where you might be taken advantage of.
Anybody else?
He's on vacation.
Rabbi, you talked us out here.
It's early morning there. I mean, he's not ready for lunch.
Go walk the dog. Enjoy your time.
Is that your dog or their dog?
It's their dog. Yeah, I would have shown you guys, but I was too caught up.
You got a blurry background. We couldn't see it anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's great to see you guys. Thank you for accommodating a virtual lesson today. And again, I hope it's a happy Shavuot, a Chag Sameach, and Shabbos. I missed
you,
it.
Rabbi.
Is it okay? Thank you.